Thank you so much for having me. It's absolutely my pleasure to be here. I love seeing so many people who are joining and have an interest in learning about movement as medicine. So I hope that you learn a lot from our conversation today. Let me go ahead and share my slides and we'll get going. I have lots of information to share. I want to make sure to save plenty of time at the end for questions. So please do put your questions in the chat so I can try to address them as well as I can once we're done. So as you heard, I wear a lot of different hats, even though I only put one of my affiliations on this slide. And what all of my different roles that I have in common is that I have a big focus on brain health. And when it comes to brain health, which we'll define a bit more in just a moment, movement is the best thing that you can do. Movement is really the best thing you can do in many ways for lots of aspects of health. And so we're going to talk about that and apply it to brain health in particular. So when we think about movement, you think about exercise in particular. You've heard your whole life that you need to exercise, and it's good for you for being healthy. And the physical benefits that we tend to think of include things like having better heart health, also called vascular health, having stronger muscles. You may have heard about how exercise can help with preventing osteoporosis, which is important, particularly as you get older, particularly for older women. How there are a variety of diseases that you can either prevent or treat with exercise or movement in general, and then improving balance. So these are all wonderful ways that exercise helps us with our overall health. And again, these are things that you've probably heard throughout your life, but you might be less familiar with the impact of exercise on your brain. So first, let me say that I'm going to use the term exercise a lot today, but I want to be clear that the research that I'll talk a little bit about and that forms the basis of my talk really does show that it's not just structured exercise. By that, I mean that you intentionally go for a walk or a jog or lift weights or do yoga, that you're trying to do these structured things in order to be healthier. That, of course, is exercise we know is wonderful. But what's also true is that physical activity in general, any movement, anything that you do with your body that that burns energy is going to be helpful when it comes to health. And that's important to keep in mind because for people who are more sedentary, meaning that they don't move very much throughout the day, it can seem daunting to start with some structured exercise program. But when you think that something small, like just walking a bit more around your house, doing some gardening, doing housework, that's still physical activity that can be just as powerful when it comes to improving health and improving brain health. So keep in mind, movement of any sort is wonderful, even though I will give a lot of specifics that have to do with structured exercise. So let's talk about why I focus on exercise and brain health. Well, part of it's that I'm a neuropsychologist. So I spent my entire training and career focused on the brain and how that relates to our behavior. And I started off my in grad school and earlier on in my career, really doing most of my work on understanding how the brain changes as we get older and how that interacts with mental health disorders like depression in particular. And I find that work very fascinating. But what I also found is that I kept coming to this point of wondering, what can we do about this though? If there's things that naturally change as we get older, our brain does start to have various sorts of declines when it comes to the structure and functioning of the brain as a natural part of the aging process. Some of those changes do put us at risk for mood symptoms that can be disruptive to life. And I'm a solution focused person. So I'm always thinking, how do we make this better or how do we prevent it? And that's how I transitioned into incorporating more intervention research, including exercise in particular, into the work that I do as a professor. So, I'm a business owner, I'm a writer, but my main job, my day job is a professor. And most of what I do is research. And I wanted my research to address trying to promote brain health, trying to promote healthier aging, and not just understanding when things go wrong. And so brain health is really the focus of all what I do. So you have some time now to look at the slide where I just summarize a few of the benefits of having a healthy brain. So, first of all, what does it mean to have a healthy brain? It means that both the structure of your brain, meaning the actual brain cells themselves, the size and the composition of the different brain regions are as healthy as possible, as intact as possible. And also that the brain communicates well. So, those brain cells communicate with each other. Everything that you do requires the coordinated activity of lots of circuits in your brain at one time. And so that communication can start to fall apart to some degree with different diseases, with aging, etc. So you want to have a healthier brain to have that better communication. And so when you have that better brain structure and you have that better brain functioning, what do you have as a result? Well, your cognitive skills are better, your memory's better, your risk for developing Alzheimer's disease and other types of dementia as you grow older is going to be lower. Your overall mood is better. So, our brain is the basis for all of our emotional functioning. So, your mood can be better and your feeling of well being. And when it comes to clinical disorders like depression or anxiety, your risk is actually lower the healthier your brain is. Since the brain is really important for your physical functioning as well, people tend to have better physical performance. And then that really all comes together to lead to better functional independence as you grow older. So, as a neuropsychologist who specializes in working with older adults, I have a lot of people who I see who are concerned about losing their keys. That tends to be the biggest concern people have. Are you going to give me a diagnosis that means I'm not going to be able to drive? They're worried about not having their independence, their functional independence. And so things like being able to maintain control of your own finances, your medications and financial and medical decisions, driving, etc. All of that is going to last longer. That independence lasts longer when your brain is healthy. So that's my commercial for why brain health is important and why we're going to focus this movement as medicine lecture on the brain in particular. So, why is exercise in particular, or movement in general, so important for the brain? Well, it has a ton of benefits when it comes to brain health. So, I talked before about the structure and function of the brain being really important when you think about brain health. And so, when it comes to exercise, what we see is that there are so many studies that show the same thing, which is that exercise helps to preserve, and in some cases, even increase the amount of volume in your brain. So that means that you have more nerve cells, more brain cells that are able to be healthy. So you lose less brain cells, you have healthier and intact cells. And in some cases, there's actually clinical trials that show that after months of exercise, you can actually grow new neurons or brain cells. Now, that might seem like science fiction, and if you were someone who thought that you can't grow new brain cells, you're not alone. A lot of people think that. But what we found over time is that what we used to think was limited to early childhood, the ability to generate new neurons, actually does stay to some degree maintained throughout life. It is true that your ability to generate new neurons, new brain cells is higher when you're younger, but you don't lose it completely. And there are things that you can do to better preserve that ability for generating new brain cells. And exercise is an excellent way of doing that. So that then leads to larger brain volumes in different parts of your brain. And what's great is that a lot of the parts of the brain that seem to be most affected are ones that we know are really important for things like memory, for attention, for problem solving and other complex skills, and also for mood regulation. So, lots of positive benefits when it comes to the actual size of the brain. Now, size is not all that matters because if the brain is not functioning well, then it doesn't really matter how large those brain regions are. But the good thing is that exercise does also improve the functioning of the brain. So, during different tasks, whether they be mental tasks or physical tasks, the brain functions more efficiently in people who are more physically fit. So, that means that communication, which is part of the next point connections, the communication between brain cells is more effective and efficient and quicker. So things like processing speed, how quickly you think, but also how quickly you move can be improved by exercise. And then the last point has to do with the vascular system, the blood flow in the brain. And it's really important the benefits that exercise has on the vascular system. And it's not just the vascular system when it comes to your heart, it has to do with your brain vascular system as well. So, in general, you'll hear the saying, what's good for your heart is good for your brain. And that is generally true because the blood supply in the body is not separate for the brain and the heart. It's all connected. So, if you're not having good blood supply and circulation throughout your body, that's associated with heart disease, then that means your brain is also not getting sufficient blood supply to maintain those connections between parts of the brain that you need to be able to function well. Exercise helps to improve the blood flow and the overall health of the vascular system in the brain. So, widespread benefits that exercise can have on your brain itself. To show you a little bit in terms of data when it comes to this, I'm not gonna go into, like, detailed, sort of science speak. I just wanted to show you a few images that I think, I like pictures, so hopefully you will too. So this is showing you an image from, a study that's basically showing you the brain if you're looking at it from the side. And there's a couple of parts of the brain that are highlighted, and these are areas of the brain that studies show tend to get larger with exercise. So one in the front, it has PFC, that stands for the prefrontal cortex. It's the part of the brain that is really instrumental when it comes to things like decision making, problem solving, multitasking, inhibiting behavior or thoughts that you might need to inhibit. All of those are really rely on the prefrontal cortex, and then also the area that's also indicated the anterior cingulate. So lots of parts of the brains that really are important for those complex cognitive skills. Also highlighted in the image is the hippocampus. And so you might know that the hippocampus is incredibly important when it comes to memory and when it comes to Alzheimer's disease, the changes that happen in the brain that lead to Alzheimer's disease tend to target the hippocampus as one of the first parts. And so if you have a hippocampus that's healthier and that is more, full of more neurons, more brain cells, then you might have that extra protection against developing Alzheimer's disease. And as we'll talk about in just a moment, we do know that people who are more physically fit have a lower risk for Alzheimer's disease. Those are the two main ones that I wanted to mention here. And one thing I want to mention also is that, sometimes in research, we have a hard time separating out cause and effect, right? If I have people who are physically fit and I measure them at one time and compare them to people who are less physically fit, and I might measure that with different physical measures, then that's helpful. It lets me know that physically fit people have certain differences from people who are not fit. But what's more powerful in terms of evidence and linking cause and effect is when you have a clinical trial. And in clinical trials, you will have, for example, a group of people who, for a certain amount of time, engage in regular exercise that's structured by the researcher. And then you have another group of people who are the control group who are not doing that exercise. They might be doing a different, less intense exercise. They might be doing no exercise at all. But either way, there's a big difference in terms of the exercise intensity. And so when you see that the group that is exercising shows actual change over time, and the group that is not getting that same exercise is showing either no change or less change, that's when you have more confidence in cause and effect. And we do have lots of that type of evidence when it comes to the benefits of exercise and the brain. When it comes to brain functioning, I have an image here that's actually from my own lab. So, one of my really amazing graduate students did a study where he was looking at people who were over the age of 50 who did 12 weeks of spin class 3 times a week. And we looked after we did brain scans before and after those 12 weeks of that aerobic exercise. It's really intense. And we looked at what's called functional connectivity in the brain. So it's how are different parts of the brain working together at different times. So how are they connected to each other in a functional standpoint, meaning they fire together. And what we found is that people who were in the aerobic exercise condition, you can see that there's this bar going up. They had an increase in that communication or that functional connectivity between parts of the brain that are important for cognitive functioning. One of them's in that sort of hippocampal sort of area, and then one of them's more in the frontal lobes. And so it's just showing you that you're having this improvement in communication in people who did the aerobic training, whereas you actually have sort of the opposite in people who just did balance training. That does not mean balance training is bad for you. It's actually quite important. But for this particular measure, what we're seeing is that we have an important difference in people who do the aerobic training. On the top right is some data that's not from my lab, but from another research lab that looks at exercise. And I wanted to put in something here about children. I don't do research in kids, but brain health is a lifelong process. The things that are important when you're older are also important when you're in middle age, when you're a young adult, when you're a child. And this is just showing you data that is indicating that in these children who were either sitting quietly for 20 minutes or who were being more physically active and walking, that parts of the brain that are important for attention were more active in the group that walked. And so you think about children needing to move and have PE and, do some physical activity throughout the day to help with focus and attention and performance in school. You think about even after school having activities that help them with focusing on their schoolwork. It just shows that throughout the lifespan, there's an important benefit that comes from movement. So I already mentioned this, so I'll just kind of be brief here and reminding you about the vascular benefits of brain health. My lab does a lot of work when it comes to vascular health, particularly in middle age and late life. And one reason for that is that a lot of the conditions that are more associated with aging, different types of dementia, different types of mental health concerns, really are ultimately linked to vascular brain health. Another reason why I focus on this a lot is that what we know is that chronic stress that can come from various sources tends to affect our heart health, our vascular health. And I do a lot of work when it comes to health disparities and understanding how there are different groups who are facing chronic sources of stress. And that could be due to low income, it could be from belonging to an ethno racially, minoritized group, it could be from any kind of group that faces chronic stress discrimination. There's this internalizing of it that happens in our bodies where the vascular system ends up being disrupted. So you have a lot more heart disease in a lot of these communities. And that heart disease is linked to brain health changes as well. And so if you can improve heart health and improve brain health, it is one way of empowering communities who do face all these sources of chronic stress to have better brain health and better overall quality of life. So that's why I harp on this so much. But again, there's in the brain, there's parts of each brain cell that's called white matter. It's the part of the brain that connects to other brain regions. And that white matter can get degraded with vascular disease, but aerobic fitness actually improves the health of the white matter. It also reduces different risk factors for heart disease, like arterial stiffness. It improves the functioning of the lining of the blood vessels, which can also lead to problems. And it also helps to promote the development of new blood vessels. So the same way that exercise can help you in terms of growing new brain cells, you also can develop more blood vessels in the brain, which is going to be helpful for getting that adequate blood flow to the brain. So aside from what we talked about already, the benefits of exercise when it comes to brain health also include chemical changes. So we know that throughout our body, we have different chemicals, some of which are going to promote cognitive functioning, positive mood, etc., and some of which can be associated with more negative health outcomes. And what's great is that exercise increases those chemicals that are really beneficial for health and functioning and decreases the ones that are not so good. So, for example, people think oftentimes about endorphin. People talk about that like runner's high kind of thing. That can come from any kind of exercise, not just running. And so, endorphins we know are helpful for relieving stress and increasing a feeling of positivity. And exercise increases endorphins. There's another chemical called epinephrine. You've probably heard of it called adrenaline. And that's a hormone that really gives energy to muscles that also is increased by exercise. Another chemical, it's a neurotransmitter and a hormone. It's called dopamine. You may have also heard of that. It tends to be involved in things like motivation, reward, cognitive functioning. Dopamine is also going to be increased by exercise. And then the last one I wanna mention that it gets increased is what's called BDNF. So the long name for that is brain-derived neurotrophic factor, but it's much easier to say BDNF. It is a chemical that is really important for the growth and survival of brain cells. And as we get older, BDNF tends to naturally decline. It also tends to be lower in some, mental health conditions like depression, and so you wanna have more BDNF because that's what really helps to support that neurogenesis, that ability to generate new neurons, and so the more BDNF, the more, what we call plasticity you have in your brain. Your brain's able to recover from injury, that it's able to, respond to exercise in terms of growing more neurons. That's gonna all be promoted by BDNF, and exercise increases it. So, lots of benefits when it comes to chemicals that are good for us being increased by exercise. Now, there are some chemicals, like I mentioned, that are not that in high doses for long periods of time are not so good for the body. One of them is cortisol. Now, cortisol is naturally um, I guess, released in our body in response to the immune system having work to do, right? So it's part of the immune response. And so cortisol is not always bad. But if cortisol stays high for long periods of time, it can start to have a negative effect. And what causes cortisol to stay high? It's stress. Cortisol is seen as a stress hormone. And when people have chronic stress, and I don't mean just like the everyday stressors that we all might have, like something that's annoying, busy day at work, okay, that's stress, that's fine. But when you have prolonged stress, because of either being in environmental circumstances that just don't give you a break, or when whatever it is, it can be anything going on in life that causes that chronic state of stress with very little relief, then that cortisol level stays high, and that's part of what can start that cascade of changes in the body that lead to vascular disease and other health problems. And so, what's great about exercise is it counters that response. It lowers cortisol levels. And so, that then helps to have a healthier level that allows your immune system, your metabolism, etc., to be able to function the way that it should. Okay, so that was a lot of detail, and hopefully, I didn't go through it too fast for you to see how exercise, movement in general, directly affects the brain itself. It affects the structure of the brain, it affects the functioning of the brain, it affects the chemistry in the brain. And all of that results in lots of benefits when it comes to your overall health and well-being. So what are those benefits? Well, one side of that is going to be memory and cognitive functioning. So our overall mental abilities are going to be better, and then our mood and well-being as well. So let's talk a little bit about that, the consequences of better brain health that comes from exercise. So there are both short-term and long-term benefits of exercise. So acute effects are those effects that happen literally right after you exercise. So there are studies where people will bring someone into a lab and they might do some kind of testing. It might be measuring cortisol levels in their blood. It might be giving them an MRI scan or something like EEG, which is looking at electrical activity in the brain. Any cognitive test, whatever you want to give, and then you have someone work out. Might be for half an hour, 45 minutes, what have you. Then you do the same measures again right after they finish working out and try to see whether or not there are those acute, like immediate benefits of exercise. Turns out there are. So we know that both cognitive functioning and mood can improve after a single bout of exercise. They don't last forever, but they are still there. So when it comes to cognitive functioning in that acute stage right afterwards, you can have improvements in those complex skills we've been talking about, like planning, problem solving, reasoning. We call those executive functions. And so executive functioning tends to be the most benefit from exercise, including in the acute stage. Attention and memory also tend to be better right after exercising. And these are effects that can last for up to 2 hours. I'd actually need to update the slide because there are a couple papers that came out more recently that show even longer than 2 hours, that up to maybe even 24 hours for cognitive functioning, which is the same time frame that we see for mood. So you have these immediate, not lasting forever, but still important benefits. And I like talking about this when I give talks because I want people to think about how you can strategically use exercise throughout your day. So for me, I know that even though I wake up at 5 every morning, I get my 7 hours of sleep. It's part of brain health, but in bed by 9:30, asleep by 10, up at 5. But I don't like getting up. I don't like getting up. I have my coffee. I'm trying to get going, and so sometimes what I'll do is exercise first thing in the morning because it really gets me going, so that I can start focusing on the work I want to get done because my attention is better. I'm feeling sharper after that. Other times I decide, I tend to have a little bit of a late afternoon or mid-afternoon slump. And so instead of having coffee at 2 in the afternoon, I can work out then because then I'm kind of getting my cognitive skills kind of sharp again from using exercise. So you can strategically use that for the kind of shorter term benefits that you get. And the same thing is true when it comes to mood. Exercise has an immediate impact in most situations on mood. I understand for some people that thought of exercising makes them feel cranky and they don't want to do it. But most people, after doing it, will feel more positive, unless they've gone too hard, too strenuous, and haven't done it in the right way. So more positive mood, less stress, less tension and anger, and that again can last for up to a day. The example I give here, probably every talk I give because I put my husband on the spot, but I tease him for teasing me, which is that particularly when I was, before I got tenure, years ago, busy academic, trying to work towards tenure. And I would, of course, have my stress would be pretty high sometimes. And so he would tell me, "Oh, you're cranky. Will you please go to the gym and come back happy?" Because he knew that if I went to the gym, I would literally come back happy. That always did the trick. And so, thinking about those mood benefits, I think, can be really beneficial as well. So, what we just talked about the immediate benefits right after you exercise. But again, that does not mean that you get one workout and you're good to go forever. We're talking about maybe up to a day. But for long term benefits, we also see that exercise affects cognitive functioning and mood when it comes to in really long term ways. So, those same cognitive skills that we talked about that had that short term benefit in people who regularly exercise, where that's part of their lifestyle and they're more physically fit, do tend to have better cognitive skills than people who are less cognitively fit. Um, the type some people ask, well, how much do I need to do? In general, you it's that moderate to vigorous exercise. So meaning that you're really getting your heart rate up. It might be harder to breathe, like you're really having a more intense workout. So the 45 to 60 minutes, that's sort of like classically what we think about in terms of like the amount that seems to have the biggest benefit. But let me say, not to get intimidated by that number. There are studies that show that even 10-minute bouts of exercise add up to benefits for brain health. And so not every workout needs to be that long. It is true that building up to meeting the recommendations from the World Health Organization, which I believe I have in a later slide, is important for getting, about 150 minutes per week of that moderate exercise. But you can start small, and it's important to start small if you have not been working out so far. This benefit for cognitive functioning is shown in different age groups. And what's great is that it's not just for healthy people wanting to get healthier, it's also for people who already have some cognitive impairment, might have depression, might have other medical conditions. You still get that cognitive benefit from exercise. And that's a more long term sort of benefit. So, in general, people age better, and we'll get into that a little bit more as well. When it comes to depression, I find it really fascinating, and this is part of what got me into exercise research, is that exercise is so effective in treating depression. And actually, some studies show that exercise can be just as beneficial as antidepressant medication. The graph that I have here is showing you a study that was looking at memory performance in people who either were in a control condition or who did an exercise intervention or who did exercise plus medication. And I should mention they were all depressed. And you could see that exercise alone in this group, actually, you improved cognitive functioning just as much as the people who are doing the combined treatment. So it is really showing the power of exercise. Okay. So a lot of the research does focus on aerobic exercise, but it's not just aerobic exercise that is beneficial. There are plenty of studies showing benefits from other exercise modalities, and let's talk about that a little bit as well. So again, the most studied is aerobic exercise, and it is very consistently shown with brain health benefits. A lot of what we've talked about already has been based on research in aerobic exercise. However, resistance training and mind body exercise are also incredibly powerful when it comes to the brain, particularly for resistance training. So that's anything that's building strength. And you could be using body weight, you could be using resistance bands, you could be using actual dumbbells. It doesn't matter. Anything that puts that resistance on the muscles and requires you to use your strength, that can be really helpful, in particular for increasing that chemical BDNF that we talked about. That's the protein that's important for the health and survival of the neurons. And so, even though you do get that benefit from aerobic, you also get it in resistance training. And some studies suggest that you get more of that BDNF boost from resistance training. So we know in terms of brain health in general, cognitive functioning, resistance training can be really beneficial. There's less clear benefits for mood when it comes to resistance training. There are some studies that suggest that intensive or what's considered excessive resistance training can actually be bad for your mood. But as I always joke, none of us are doing it to that degree, right? I love working out. No, we're talking about like really, really extreme levels of resistance training. So don't worry about doing resistance training causing mood problems. It's really to the extreme. People who are sort of overtraining, in particular, if they're, like, planning for a bodybuilder competition or something, you might have to watch out for it, but for the rest of us, that's not gonna be a problem. So, but just know that resistance training has a lot for the brain and cognitive part and less benefits when it comes to the mood. What is great when it comes to mood is mind-body exercise. So, and I have to say, as someone who works out 6 days a week, my favorite thing to do is mind-body exercise. I do all of it because I need all of it, but it just feels so good from a mood standpoint. Doing something like yoga, Pilates, Tai Chi, all of that. Again, that lower intensity when it comes to the aerobic part, but the research shows so many benefits in reducing negative mood, reducing depressive symptoms in people who are depressed, reducing anxiety, reducing stress. And then it also has that benefit when it comes to attention and things like those executive functions and your processing speed. So as you can see, there's benefits from any type of exercise. And as I mentioned earlier, it's not just the structured exercise, it's the everyday physical activity, walking your dog, doing, mowing your lawn, doing heavy housework. All of those things can really be really beneficial. And then doing things that are more like hobbies, like playing golf, that is still physical. You're having to walk around and you're carrying things and you're doing something that's burning energy and using that fuel. So any kind of movement is good. Movement is truly medicine. So, with that in mind, it's not surprising that lots of studies show that multimodal training is best, meaning that you're doing different types of exercise. So, if you're already active, but you're just doing one thing, some people have like a particular thing to get into, which is perfectly fine. Let's say you're a runner. That's awesome. Keep running. But it's also good to throw in some strength training, resistance training, and throwing in some mind body. So, having a combination of modalities is ideal, and I always love the idea of mixing in a cognitive challenge because you get that extra boost. So, dancing is an example. I actually got into exercise personally right before I got into exercise as a researcher. I, by coincidence, got into it as a person, and the first thing I did was dancing. It was Zumba. I learned about Zumba classes and went to a class, and I was immediately hooked. It was just didn't feel like I was working out. I was just having fun. You're, like, drenched in sweat at the end, and you're ready for more still. It's wonderful, but what's great about something like that is that if you've ever done any kind of dancing classes, it's a lot of cognitive work. You're trying to keep up, you're trying to learn and anticipate the next move, you're trying to remember, what was, done before, and so adding that cognitive challenge to movement is another way of improving your brain health because as you'll see towards the end of this talk, cognitive activity, cognitive engagement is another brain healthy behavior that can really be helpful throughout your life. So multimodal training is really fantastic. Okay, so I alluded to this a little bit throughout the talk so far, but I do want to come back to the idea of aging. So, aging is my passion. I have been studying aging since I was in graduate school. I got a certificate in gerontology, and I call myself the very long title of gero neuropsychologist because I'm a neuropsychologist focusing on gerontology or working with older adults. And what I find really exciting is to think about how we can promote successful aging, better aging, to not assume that aging always means decline, that's going to have you at home not able to do anything, but instead trying to embrace as much activity, as much health as you can, knowing that your body's going to change as you age, but you can counter some of those changes to some degree with healthy behaviors. And exercise is a great way of really um, making you more likely to have successful aging. So, later life can most certainly be a time of sustained health and vitality. And your mindset about aging makes a big difference about how you age. People who just sort of accept and internalize the idea that I'm older, that means I'm not going to be able to do much, tend to not do much. People who say, you know what, I'm going to keep going as long as I can. I'm going to be active physically and mentally and socially in all these ways tend to do better. And exercise is one way of being really successful when it comes to the aging process. So there's different models of successful aging in the research literature that talk about, for example, the most sort of well accepted model talks about the absence of disease and disability as one aspect of it, engagement with life, and then high physical and cognitive functioning. Literally, all of those things are enhanced by exercise. So, if you accept this model that's been researched very often in the aging literature as being true, exercise is one of the keys because it does help to reduce the risk for different diseases. It improves functional disability, as we discussed before. Clearly, you have the physical benefits that you already knew about. You've learned today about the cognitive benefits, and it is part of being engaged with life. So exercise is really key to successful aging. And so we know that as we get older, we're more likely to maintain basically a youthful brain if we're active, but you can preserve brain structure and function to a greater degree if you're active, sort of countering the normal age related decline that tends to happen. And in some cases, if someone's already older and you've already started to have some of those changes in your brain, you can to some degree sometimes reverse those changes with exercise. Now, I'm not saying you reverse it forever. I'm not saying that there's a true fountain of youth. I'm saying if there is, the closest thing to it is exercise. It can help you to get to a more youthful state and hold on to intact functioning longer, even if eventually, if you're lucky and you live to be 100. I do research on people who are 100 or older. That's fantastic. But by that point, there might be some decline, but you guess what? You held on longer than you would have otherwise. When it comes to Alzheimer's disease, which is the most common cause of dementia, we know that there are certain pathological changes in the brain that occur that seem to be causing Alzheimer's disease or certainly are part of the process. And exercise can actually reduce the amount of that pathology in the brain, which is really, really amazing. And then, not surprisingly, given those direct brain changes, you have better memory and cognitive functioning as you age, that you can maintain your level of functioning longer. And then again, if you start exercising later on in life, you can sometimes improve your current level of cognitive functioning. To say a little bit more about the dementia piece, it's important to keep in mind, as I say all the time, brain health is a lifelong process. So, what you do earlier matters. So, people who are more physically active in young adulthood and middle adulthood tend to have a lower risk for developing Alzheimer's disease or other types of dementia later on. And then people who are already older who start an exercise program also can have that lower risk. People I think I have a slide about it. I don't have a slide about it, but I will just mention that even people who already have dementia, to the degree that they're safely able to do some kind of movement, and might need to be more structured, might need to be less intense, but that also can be helpful for maintaining some of the intact cognitive functions that are there. So, particularly in earlier stages, dementia does not mean that every cognitive ability is completely washed out. Sometimes you have some cognitive skills that are still stronger than others. And so you can enhance those intact or closer to intact cognitive skills, even in someone with dementia, by having movement be part of their treatment. Okay. So you've learned a lot already about exercise and how great it is for your health. But it's easier said than done, right? So I'm realistic. I'm not saying that you're gonna say, "Oh, well, Vonetta Dotson told me I should do these things, so I'm gonna go right now and do it." And it takes a while to get started, and you wanna have some tips. So just some quick tips, and there's more, in the book for those of you who win it or who might decide to order it. But one thing is that you wanna make sure that you're realistic about your goals and that you make specific goals. If you just say, "Oh, I'm inspired, I'm gonna start exercising," and then leave it at that, it's not gonna happen. So you wanna make very specific goals, concrete goals, and something that feels attainable. So if you're not moving much at all now, other than like necessary to go throughout your day, then just decide maybe 2 days a week to get started, that you're going to take a 10 to 15-minute walk, or that, you have your exercise bike in your basement that you never use. You're gonna go pull it out while you're watching a show on Netflix because you're entertained because you're watching something that just feels very doable. But make a specific plan and make it realistic and be safe about it so that you're not jumping into, I'm gonna go do a cross training class at the gym, if you haven't been moving much. So be realistic, make it specific, plan ahead. Life happens. We are all so busy. So make an appointment for yourself. Look at your calendar, figure out when is it feasible to fit in at least 10 to 15 minutes of movement. You can start small. If you have more time, make it half an hour, but plan ahead, put it in your calendar, think about what you're going to do, where you're going to do it, what things need to get prepared to make sure that you do it. If you're going to work and you need to think about, okay, got to pack a gym bag, make sure I have everything. This might sound really small, but it makes a big difference to not have that frustration of like, I had a great idea, never happened if I didn't plan for it. Know that barriers are gonna happen. So think about, if you can, what might be the barriers and see if you can try to plan around that. If the barriers become unavoidable, don't, give up. Say, "Okay, well, that didn't work out today. What are we gonna do tomorrow?" Try to make it fun. The more fun something is, the more we go back to it. So, like I said, for me, I started with my exercise journey doing Zumba because it was fun and I didn't feel like I was working out. Then that expanded to lots of other things. And now, again, I do multimodal training throughout the week. So make it fun, whether that mean doing it with a friend, whether it mean doing something that doesn't feel like exercise, like dancing, whatever it is that makes it fun for you. And then, as I talked about before, you can combine brain healthy behavior. So, brain healthy behavior can include things like social engagement, keeping your mind active. If you can do something that involves more than one of them, then that's awesome. And so, an example would be working out with a friend. You're being social and getting movement at the same time. So we know the barriers are real. Sometimes financial limitations can get in the way. So try to think about free YouTube videos for working out. Walking tends to be, free and accessible. Of course, you want to make sure you live in a place where you feel safe doing that, but try to be creative about getting around thinking that you need to join an expensive gym. Sometimes people just don't know. And so now you know that there are benefits in this way when it comes to exercise for your brain health. We talked about goals, making sure that they're specific and realistic. Sometimes cultural factors can be a factor, more so in the sense that if we feel like culturally it might not be as emphasized for certain groups, or it could be just that in your family it was never a big emphasis, then trying to not say that there was anything wrong with how you were raised or where you live or with your group, but just saying that, you know what, I'm going to tweak this part of things because I want to be healthier. It doesn't mean that I'm trying to completely do away with other aspects of my culture, environmental limitations, etcetera. So there's lots of things that can be barriers. And environmental limitations could be anything ranging from, like in my neighborhood, I live part of the time in Boston, part of the time in Atlanta area, and my neighborhood doesn't have sidewalks. It's really annoying. So, not all the streets do, and my street does not. And so walking our dogs, walking outside becomes really a hassle. We have to like drive somewhere to like walk in a way that feels comfortable. And for me, I have other ways of exercising, but for some people, that really could get in the way for trying to do an accessible, sort of easier to get to exercise like walking. So think about, again, how you can overcome those barriers. And it's important for us to keep in mind that some people are going to have more barriers than others. So really briefly, in the last 2 minutes before I take some questions, I just wanted to mention that when it comes to promoting health through movement, movement as medicine, including brain health, that there are different levels of society that have a role to play when it comes to this. So there's something called a social ecological model that we use in research that talks about these different levels of society that can be relevant. So really briefly, we know that when it comes to policy, for example, that anything ranging from insurance coverage for exercise, I'm just dying for all insurance companies to pay for gym memberships and personal training because they would save more in the end to not have to pay for people who develop diseases that could have been avoided. Clinical guidelines for treatments for diseases, those are more policy level influences. When it comes to our community, things like how walkable is our community? Are there green spaces to go and be outside and to be engaged in physical activity? Does it feel safe? Those things are all important. Different organizations that we deal with are important. Schools, workplaces, healthcare systems. What are the rules and the cultures? Do workplaces allow for time for people to exercise during the day and not have to take time off the clock, for example? And then interpersonally, do we have relationships that promote that social aspect of exercise? And then as an individual, what is our motivation level, our attitude, our knowledge? And then does our own health status interfere? There's always something you can work through, even with having physical limitations to exercise, but it can make it harder. So there's lots of levels. It's complicated, but I just wanted to put that out as food for thought. Last thing I'll say to wrap up is that exercise is one of many pillars of brain health. So we know it's not just exercise, but a heart healthy diet, being cognitively engaged, being physically healthy, sleep and relaxation and social engagement are all really important. Going through this quickly for the sake of time, but the my book goes into each of these things. There's a chapter for each one going into detail about the science behind it, as well as what you can do practically to make it happen. You heard a little bit earlier about my company, CerebralFit. We put this into action. We actually offer things like personal training, nutrition assessments, social events at our center. We have a Zen room for relaxation, all of these things that we do to try to promote a brain healthy lifestyle. And even though we're in the Atlanta area, we do offer some online programming for things like brain fog. So look us up if you think you might be interested in some of that. And we do take Medicare and other insurance for some of our services. So I like to always kind of have this towards the end because I love the idea of thinking about our potential to always grow and change. So Maya Angelou, who I quote all the time, says each of us has that right, that possibility to invent ourselves daily. So when I think about starting and maintaining brain healthy life, you can invent yourself daily. And if one day doesn't go as well as you want it, the next day try again. You can invent yourself every single day. It's a lifelong process. So wherever you are, whatever age you are, whatever your health status, work on it now. And I appreciate your attention. I would love to hear some of your questions. And there's a QR code if you wanted to order the book. You can follow us on social media for brain healthy tips. And I will stop there. Thank you so much.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Dr. Dotson. This was fantastic. We have a couple questions. One of them is when the positive effects on executive function with exercise, do people with ADHD also benefit and how?
Love that question. Absolutely. So yes. So what it does, it actually can help with focus, which a lot of time for ADHD can be a problem. So it might sound counterintuitive to say that like you get yourself worked up with exercise, but you focus better, but you do because you have some of those chemical increases that actually allow you to focus more. So both in the short term as well as long term, exercise is really helpful for people with ADHD.
Excellent. Another question. Could you give some more examples of cognitive challenges and how that relates to movement?
Yes, I wish that I had a whole hour to talk about the pet. So any time that you are both sort of having to think actively while you're exercising, the better. So in general, cognitive engagement, using your mind to problem solve or multitask is good for kind of flexing your brain muscles, if you will. You don't have muscles in your brain. I'm just using that as a metaphor. So, but for example, people will do like a dual training where they are trying to solve math problems and like do some kind of exercise at the same time. Like literally, there's a program in the Atlanta area called Vivo where people are, doing weight training, but like talking to someone and having to answer questions about themselves, their lives, math problems, whatever, but they're having to talk at the same time. It's something about that sort of dual kind of role that the brain is playing, having to do something physical and cognitive that seems to be really beneficial. And so for a person who's not enrolled in a program like that, I think it's doing something like exercise classes tend to require you to keep up more. And that's one way of just kind of keeping your brain engaged and not just more passively riding a bike. Not knocking riding a bike, it's great. But it is nice to throw in some things that require you to follow some instructions, keep up with the instructor, that kind of thing.
And we have another question. Is exercise beneficial to children who've been in accidents and who have potentially had undiagnosed damage?
Oh, yeah. So that's an unfortunate situation. And so the answer is most likely yes, but I want to give the caveat that it depends on the timing after the accident that you want to be careful. So people used to think that, like, after, for example, a head injury, people said, just don't do anything, make sure you're not moving too much. And now I realize that's the worst idea. Actually, you do need some type of safe movement afterwards because it helps your brain heal. Again, you're getting more of that influx of those chemicals that help your brain regenerate. But you wanna do that under supervision and not just, like, make up your own thing because there people can have problems with balance and other things that can make it unsafe. So, in general, exercise is helpful for promoting the brain's ability to heal itself. And so, if there's someone who has possibly undiagnosed damage, a lot of times things don't show up on a brain scan. Exercise can be very helpful, but just make sure there's no physical limitations that would make it unsafe, and you might wanna consider doing it under the guidance of, a physical therapist or a personal trainer or someone who has some knowledge about it.
Excellent. That's great advice. Thank you. We have another question about if audiobooks, listening to an audiobook while exercising would count as cognitive engagement.
Yes,
Anyone
and
want to
please don't do that while you're doing something really complicated because it's gonna be bad, but yes, listen to an audiobook while you're walking on a treadmill or walking outside on a track where you're not gonna be again, I'm always promoting safety, so as long as it's not too distracting, that's a wonderful way of doing it, and the audiobook is also kind of that cognitive challenge, right? You're listening if you're trying to keep up, with something and not just kind of passively listening, then you're getting that cognitive piece, you're getting the physical piece, that's wonderful. So, yeah.
Excellent. Any other questions from folks? We got lots of great comments about how wonderful this was and insightful. Uh, let's see. It looks like we just got another one.
And I
Okay.
can take this down so I can see.
It looks like T asked, "How can someone get engaged with your company when they live on the West Coast versus ATL?"
Yes, so we have some online programs. Since we have a few minutes left and the questions are slowing down, I'll tell you a little bit about it. So we're developing some more. What we have right now is a 6-week program that we developed for people who have brain fog. So it's every week for 6 weeks, you get sent to your email a set of modules that help you work is on focus on your cognitive fitness, your physical fitness, and your nutrition in ways that can help with brain fog. And brain fog people will complain about for a lot of reasons, right? It could be pregnancy or menopause. It could be long COVID. It could be people going through cancer treatment. It could just be stress of life. You know, people just have that general feeling of like, I just can't quite focus well. I feel like I'm not as sharp as I used to be. And so it's a 6-week program that you do at your own, like your own pace. So you get the information and you're able to do that when you are able to. And so it doesn't require being in person. That's one way. We also have online personal training. So you can do Zoom-based training where you meet with our trainer over Zoom and they walk you through all the exercises, watch your form, help you stay safe. That's an option. We also have app-based training. So there's an app called True Coach. The trainer can see what your goals are and send you workouts to do. That again, you can do at your own timing. That has video demonstrations and things like that as well. You can chat with him through the app. So those are some of the things that we do. We're also going to be offering some. Hopefully, in the next 2 months, we're going to start offering nutrition classes. I'm so excited about this. I have to say, okay, so I'm a wannabe cook. My retirement plan is to be a professional chef. I love cooking. I have a nutritionist who we work with. She knows the nutrition piece, but doesn't like cooking. I love cooking and I'm learning the nutrition piece from her. So we're going to do classes together quarterly, starting hopefully late in the summer, where we show you brain healthy recipes that also taste really good. And those will be something that you can attend from anywhere. So those are examples of the kinds of things. Feel free to reach out to me and with the contact information I had up there. And I'm happy to share more about the virtual options that we have that could work for you.
Great. We had a couple quick questions. Are there any suggestions on the best types of exercise after a stroke?
So in general, that's a really good question. Since stroke is caused by it's a vascular incident, right? It means the blood supply was disrupted in your brain. It's like a heart attack, but it's in your brain instead of in your heart. And so that means that you want to really focus on cardiac rehab, which actually is covered by insurance oftentimes, because it's a medical event. So anything that is aerobic, that's getting your heart rate up, is going to be really, really important. You really want to improve your vascular health, your heart health overall, to reduce the risk for additional strokes or other sorts of heart conditions. So all exercise is important, but certainly if you've had a stroke or a heart attack or anything in that vascular family, aerobic training is important. Start small. Don't start running a marathon right away, but definitely work on getting your heart rate up, multiple times a week if possible.
Excellent. Well, I think we're coming up on time. So, thank you so much for this wealth of information. And as we mentioned at the beginning, we did record this and we'll be putting it on our YouTube channel, our DPHN YouTube channel, and also our website. So I encourage you to go to our website. We also posted today our next Lunch and Learn, which will be the title will be Savor the Season. So we're going to hear from our local extension service on preserving food and healthy food and produce and gardening. So we will also put Dr. Dotson's contact information in the chat again. And you'll also be seeing the survey come out in the email that you used to register for this webinar. So thank you again, Dr. Dotson. It's been delightful. And thank you all for the great questions and comments for another successful Lunch and Learn. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.